Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Just Curious Reacts. Today we're going to be doing part 2 of our reaction to Dr. Stephen Meyer's conversation with Joe Rogan on the Joe Rogan Experience podcast. And of course, just as we did with our introduction in our last video with Professor Stephen Meyer, Dr. Meyer is very much an advocate for the case of intelligent design using a conscious principle to explain how creation takes place, especially when it comes to understanding the theory of evolution. So let's get right into it. Part 2 of our reaction to Stephen Meyer with Joe Rogan. Let's get to it.
The experience of having the constant flux of changing sense perceptions left me with a sense that there was nothing solid to hold on to in reality, and so this is not a great, this is not the argument for the existence of God that I would repose in which I would repose great trust. I'm not trying to persuade anyone by this. I'm just telling what my experience was at this point. I later found what I think are very, very persuasive arguments, both philosophically and scientifically. The thing that really convinced me as a university student studying philosophy was an argument known as the argument from epistemological necessity. The fundamental question in modern philosophy that has really just been a stumper and has led to this whole postmodern turn where people don't think there's no objective basis for any reality is the question of the reliability of the human mind. On what basis can we trust the way our minds process all that sensory information? This goes back to Hume and Kant and some of the philosophers in the Enlightenment period. And from that point forward, there was a great doubt. Maybe we can't trust our minds. Maybe we can't trust. We have all these things we assume about reality in order to make sense about reality. That every cause has an effect, for example. But we can't prove those things. We have to use those assumptions in order to know anything at all. And I encountered this argument that suggested, well, if we try to justify our ability to know the world around us by empirical data, by things we observe, this was Hume's argument. Can't do it. He was a radical empiricist and found that in order to make any sense of the sense impressions he had to presuppose the uniformity of nature. But to prove the uniformity of nature, he had to make reference to sensory observations, and so he was arguing in a circle.
This argument here, especially in the philosophical traditions of India, whether we can use our sensory perceptions to define reality. And you will find in a lot of literature in the field of Indian philosophy, especially Sanskrit literature that is available, there's a lot of discussion on reality and defining reality. In the Vedanta philosophy, they describe reality as having 3 degrees, 3 sattas. So reality can be empirical, reality can also be transcendental, and reality can also be projectional, not tangible. Let me give an example. So empirical reality would be like the world that we are experiencing right now, all that we are receiving through our sense organs, through our eyes, our ears, etc. This entire world of objects and colors, etc. that we are seeing, experiencing, this will be called the empirical reality. There's the apparent reality, which is like, for example, a dream. In dream, you experience so many things, but it is not actually tangible. Let's say you have a dream where you dreamt that you were a millionaire and you had $1 million. You can't do anything with that $1 million in dream, right? So that's apparent reality. And the third degree of reality in the Vedanta philosophy is that of transcendental reality or absolute reality. And that is called as Brahma or Brahman consciousness. And that is not something which can be seen or heard through senses. That is not something which is to be entertained as a thought in the mind. Now, these degrees of reality, when they examine in Indian philosophy, in Vedanta philosophy in particular, they describe that reality, that absolute reality, as being beyond the senses, beyond the mind. meaning that there is a assumed distrust. There's an assumed distrust in what the mind and the senses are able to perceive. So there's an acceptance of the limitations of the instruments of mind and senses. Just to connect to what Dr. Meyer is saying here. Back to the video.
And so it came down, you couldn't justify the reliability of assumptions we make in our minds by observing the world. You had to use those assumptions to make sense of the observations. But if you presupposed that our minds were made by a benevolent creator who gave us those assumptions in order to make sense of the world that he also made, then there was a principle of correspondence between the way the mind worked and the way the world worked, in which case we could trust the basic reliability of the mind. And this turns out to be one of the key foundational assumptions that gave rise to modern science. It was called the idea of intelligibility. Newton, Boyle, Kepler, the great founders of modern science, thought that nature had secrets to reveal. There were patterns there to be revealed that we could understand because our minds had been made in the image of the same rational creator who had built rationality and design and pattern and lawful order into the world.
Do you believe in evolution?
I believe in, I believe in microevolution. I believe that there are real evolutionary processes. I'm skeptical about what's called universal common descent, the idea that all living forms have evolved from one single common ancestor. I'm profoundly skeptical about chemical evolution, the idea that the non-living chemicals in a prebiotic ocean or prebiotic soup arrange themselves to form the first living cell.
This idea of inert, insentient matter, coming together, chemical compounds coming together, combining together to create consciousness, to create life. This actually is accepted by certain traditions in India, in Indian schools of philosophy. One such school of philosophy is known as the Charvak school of philosophy or the materialist school of philosophy. They accept, their viewpoint is that what we know as consciousness, sentiency, life principle has come about as a result of 4 elements. The body, the 4 elements of the body means air, fire, water, and earth. That's how they looked at the particles of the universe. That's how they look at the composition of the world around us. A combination of these 4 elements in a certain particular configuration gives rise to the life principle or the conscious experience. So this is accepted by even Indian schools of philosophy like the Charvak school. Of course, there is a lot of debate and argument to refute such an idea, but it does exist in Indian traditions also. One other point Dr. Meyer was making here, and we can think about it, the idea of cause and effect, that to accept the rationality of cause and effect when we are examining, what is truth, what is reality, we are doing that on the basis of what we have come to understand about the universe. But there is no further scientific analysis or philosophical analysis unless you set some parameter for logical inquiry. If cause-effect analysis is not there, let's just say, well, it's just a perception of our own minds only. We can't trust. We see cause-effect, relationships in this world, but we can't assume that that is pervading the entire universe, that there is a cause-effect relationship to every aspect of the universe. If we throw out, logical reasoning, cause-effect analysis, then where does the human intellect stand when it comes to inquiring, examining, questioning, observing the phenomena known as this universe? Just something to ponder upon. Let's get back to the video.
And I'm also skeptical about the creative power of the mutation selection mechanism, which, as it happens, so are many leading evolutionary biologists today. I attended a conference in 2016 at convened by the Royal Society in London, Royal Society being the oldest and most august scientific body in the world. And it was convened by a group of evolutionary biologists who were essentially dissatisfied with neo-Darwinism, the standard textbook theory that we learn in all high school and college textbooks, and many of them were saying we need a new theory of evolution. The first talk at that conference was given by Gerd Müller, a prominent Austrian evolutionary biologist, and he simply enumerated the 5 major what he called explanatory deficits of neo-Darwinism. And his basic perspective was the mutation selection mechanism does a good job of optimizing or modifying pre-existing forms. It can generate small-scale variation, but it does a very poor job of explaining the origin of those forms. Think about, for example, the Darwin's finch beaks. Great job of explaining how variations in weather patterns result in changes in the shape and structure of the finch beaks. But that mechanism turns out not to do a good job of explaining the origin of birds or other major animal groups in the first place. So modification, yes. Innovation, no.
But
So
modification over massive amounts of time, don't you think that would eventually lead to new groups? Because a lot of new groups have similar origins, or at least origins from one ancestor.
Well, time.
primates.
Yeah, time was always the hero of the plot. But let me just run
Okay.
a couple of arguments by you, and let's see
Okay.
what you think. Okay, and I developed these in a lot of detail in my book Darwin's Doubt.
I think it's about to get more interesting here, guys.
If we now know, thanks to the genetic revolution, the molecular biological revolution, that if you want to build a new form of life, you have you have to have new code, because all new forms of life depend upon new anatomical, a fundamentally new type of animal, for example. So you need new anatomical structures but the new anatomical structures require new cell types, new types. So if you got animals that first come on the line and they have a digestive system, they have a gut. Well, you got to have enzymes that can service a gut, that can process food. So enzymes are types of proteins. Proteins are built from the informational code in DNA. So anytime you want to get it's just like in the computer world. If you want to give your computer a new function, you've got to provide new code. So we have these long digital bit strings of A's, C's, G's, and T's, not zeros and ones, but A's, C's, G's, and T's in a digital string, and we call that a gene. And if you have a section of DNA for building a protein, that's great, all works. Now, but if you want to build a fundamentally new form of life, you got to have new proteins to service the new cell types to build the new anatomical structures. In our computer world, we know that if you start randomly changing the zeros and ones in a section of digital code, you're going to degrade the function of that code long before you come up with a new string for making a new program or operating system. The functional sequences they're highly isolated in what's called sequence space. You can change a few things and still retain function, but after a very few number of changes, you're going to degrade the function, and long before you come up with a new function. Now, the Darwinian mechanism starts with the idea that there are random changes in those digital bit strings, those sequences of A's, C's, G's, and T's. And based on our experience in the computer world, we would expect that random changes are going to, again, degrade those strings long before they're capable of building a new protein.
This is really interesting if you see from the standpoint of genetic coding, and he's comparing it also with computer programming and coding. If you want to have any new process, you would need to write a new code for that process. And if you were to just randomly change any bit on that code, it would degrade the system, in the words of Professor Meyer here. It would degrade the system means it will probably degenerate before it gets better. Of course, I think Joe Rogan, he's arguing the point that over a large expanse of time, over many millennia, because there's so much time for the evolution process to unfold, by which variety can be explained. Variety in species, variety in functions, variety in forms, etc. I don't know, guys. You let me know what you think. I think it's a really interesting point to think about when it comes to Darwinism, neo-Darwinism, and the theory of evolution. And Of course, those who have a background in Hinduism, Hindu philosophy, Hindu thoughts on creation, you all would be familiar with some form of evolution theory. I think we'll look to take that up in one of these upcoming videos, how Hindu philosophy speaks of evolution, its version of evolution. But I think that's it for now, guys. If you enjoyed this video, do give us a thumbs up. Subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. Leave us a comment below what you thought of today's video. What do you think of these theories about evolution, concept of intelligent design needed to explain the grand variety that we know today as the world around us, the universe around us, the cosmos around us. Until next time, stay curious.